The second I saw 6:25 a.m. urgent pop-up on my Harmony Grove HOA app. I knew it wasn't a friendly reminder about trash day. Nobody schedules an emergency Zoom at pre-dawn o'clock unless they're trying to break your spirit before your first sip of coffee. I was still in my robe, mug in hand, hair shoved into a half bun like a woman one bad notification away from snapping. I clicked the link expecting maybe a pipe leak or a raccoon sighting. Instead, I got Karen Hargrove, the new HOA president, wearing that smug-ass grin like she just invented community standards. "Hey, Jenna," she said, not even pretending to warm up. "This isn't working. Your attitude's toxic to the harmony of Harmony Grove Estates. We're removing you from the board and issuing a $5,000 fine effective immediately. No warning, no vote, just 5 words and the smell of fresh-cut grass betrayal." I blinked. Didn't argue. Didn't cry. Didn't even ask why. Because I knew Karen had been gunning for this since the old president stepped down and handed her the gavel. I'd questioned one too many of her PowerPoint pipe dreams, banning bird feeders because they attract rodents, mandating grass at exactly 2.5 inches, finding anyone whose American flag was bigger than 3 by 5. And for that, I was labeled difficult, negative, toxic. It's always the same script with these Karens. You carry the weight, bleed for the community, anchor the ship during every drought and special assessment. Then some shiny new busybody with a minor in manipulation wants your seat. Suddenly you're the problem. Not her 47-page new rulebook. Not her slide deck with 6 buzzwords and 0 common sense. You. By 7:10 a.m., my board login was dead. The Harmony Guard app, our digital backbone for violations. Do us. Pool bookings. Everything. Flashed access revoked. No farewell email. No board thread. Just silence and a cold gust of neighborhood amnesia. But here's what Karen forgot. I don't bet everything on one roll. Not after what happened to me back in 21. That's why 3 years ago, when the board hired me to architect the new smart system, I had every member sign off on the migration agreement buried in the doc. Section 3. The clause that licensed modules 4 through 7 of our entire automation architecture to me personally through a shell company I formed when they gave me ownership over the upgrade. Jenna Wells Holdings, LLC. Sounds fancy enough to pass legal. Specific enough to be binding. That document lived in a private folder on my personal drive called insurance. Most people hoard vacation pics or cat memes. I hoard receipts. I didn't get angry. I got prepared. Before we dive deeper, real quick, if you're one of the 97% of folks listening to HOA horror stories without hitting subscribe, do me a favor. Smash that like button. Subscribe. It doesn't cost you a dime, but it keeps this crew fueled on sarcasm and certified mail. All right, back to the beautiful collapse. By 8:40 a.m., I was in my kitchen staring at the grayed out app on my phone. Fists clenched, heart thudding slow and heavy like I was bracing for an impact that had already landed. But I didn't spiral. I clicked one folder. Just one. Buried beneath layers of old meeting minutes. Recipes I'll never cook. And dog photos. Was the folder I created 3 years ago. Real boring. Real forgettable. That was the point. Inside it, a copy of the licensing agreement Karen herself had initialed without blinking during the 2022 system upgrade, back when the old board still trusted me to rebuild the neighborhood's digital spine in under 4 months. Section 3. Paragraph 2. Line 4. All derivative and deployment rights for modules 4 through 7, including the automated violation engine, fine collection API, amenity booking logic, and vendor orchestration layers, shall remain licensed exclusively to the originator, Jenna Wells Holdings, LLC. No sublicensing or redistribution permitted without written consent. Translation: the parts that actually made Harmony Guard work, The parts that let Karen terrorize everyone with instant fines and locked gates were mine. Not morally, legally. I remember the night I wrote that clause. I'd been up for 19 hours fixing a glitch that kept double billing dues when legal pinged me for final copy. They wanted it by midnight. I knew they wouldn't read past the first page. So I slid it in. Plain, dry, invisible to anyone not reading with a lawyer's eye. And even then, only the good ones. I never planned to use it. It was a parachute, not a weapon. But when a pearl-clutching busybody with a B- ego and C-level delusions kicks you to the curb before breakfast, that clause becomes armor. I didn't call anyone from the old board. Didn't warn them. Not my job anymore. Instead, I scrolled to a name I'd left untouched for months. Cara Alvarez, VP of Operations at AltGuard Management, the professional HOA firm 2 towns over. Sharp as a scalpel. Twice as fast. We'd met at a Homeowners Association conference where half the men thought we were there to refill the coffee. Cara was the only one who didn't flinch when I outlined adaptive enforcement layers over lunch. When I told her I wasn't ready to switch yet, she just smiled and said, "When? Not if." I hit call. She picked up on the first ring. "Jenna," I said, voice steady. My calendar just cleared. I could hear her smile through the phone. "I'll have coffee and paperwork ready in 20. And that was it. No screaming. No LinkedIn rant. My revenge didn't need a billboard, just a contract, a pen, and a memory like mine. They wiped me off their servers like I was a glitch. But the funny thing about glitches, sometimes they're the only reason the whole system runs. Delete the wrong one and the entire neighborhood seizes. I hadn't even left the house yet, and the countdown had already begun. By 11:12 a.m., I was walking past the glass-walled conference rooms at AltGuard's sleek headquarters with a smile that hadn't touched my face in weeks. Cara met me in the lobby herself, heels clicking like punctuation marks, eyes already calculating 10 moves ahead. No small talk, no pity, just a nod, a smirk, and a folder that looked suspiciously like liberation. Inside it, the offer letter, $670,000 total comp, autonomy clause, the works. I could redesign whatever I wanted, however I wanted. Zero interference from pearl-clutching Karens who thought MVP meant make vacation photos public. My hands didn't shake when I signed. Cara leaned across the table like a queen, surveying new territory. "We're not copying what they did," she said, voice low and clear. "We're building what they forgot." She didn't mean it as a jab at Harmony Grove, but God, it landed like one, because she got it. She knew the thing I'd spent 5 years screaming into the void while Karen played dress-up as community savior. We shook hands. Hers firm. Mine still a little cold, but warming fast. As we wrapped up, she opened her laptop and added, almost as an afterthought, "You might want to mute the neighborhood group chat for a bit." I raised an eyebrow. She grinned. "Let's just say your exit might create ripples." She was right. By the time I walked out into the California sun, AltGuard's internal Slack already had the welcome memo drafted. One photo, one title, Director of Product Architecture, and one perfect line at the bottom, "Enforcement needs a spine." Suddenly, I wasn't the woman with attitude. I was the woman with leverage. Back at the circus I used to call home, the unraveling started soft, like a violin string fraying under tension. Around 1:15 p.m., the landscape crew tried to pull the automated irrigation schedule and hit a dead link. No schema files, no zone maps. The Harmony Guard portal flagged externally hosted. The crew lead pinged Karen, thinking maybe it was just a permissions reset. Karen checked the logs, blinked, then rechecked. The folders weren't missing. They'd never been internal to begin with. At 1:37 p.m., the Gatehouse team opened a ticket. Can't access API layer for visitor approvals on modules 4 through 7. One security guard tried the sandbox environment. Token returned a hard 403. Another tried rebuilding from an older backup. ran smack into dependency errors that looked like a Rube Goldberg machine coded in pure spite. Karen, of course, wasn't panicked yet. "It's fine," she typed in the board Slack at 1:48 p.m., the human equivalent of a shrug emoji. "Just rebuild it from the existing fork." I could picture her lounging in that leather chair she bought with discretionary funds, sipping something artisanal, thinking she was 5 steps ahead when she wasn't even holding the board. Someone must have hesitated, maybe the treasurer, because Karen doubled down. "We own the platform. People, let's not get dramatic. Copy the architecture and rewrite the enforcement layer from scratch. No big deal. But here's the thing. That fork they were so confident about wasn't self-contained. It referenced a modular orchestration layer hosted under a license with Jenna Wells Holdings LLC, my LLC. The API calls didn't just pull from code. They depended on external logic I designed. Licensed and updated monthly, quietly, legally. They never read the service contract that went with it. Never checked the license path in their own build pipeline. Hell, they never even asked who hosted the fallback instance when the system tanked last fall. Hint, it wasn't them. By 2:03 p.m., the IT contractor sent an internal email marked urgent. "Does anyone have access to the original endpoint configuration docs?" No one did, because those docs didn't live on HOA servers. They lived behind my login, behind my clause, behind a woman they'd erased before sunrise. I didn't hear any of this firsthand. Of course, I wasn't in their group chat anymore. But Kara was. One of her senior engineers used to date their gatehouse supervisor. Turns out neighborhood drama makes people chatty when things start catching fire. She forwarded me a screenshot with no comment. I didn't need one. The thread showed confused board members spiraling from, "We can just replicate the calls," to "Wait, does anyone actually know what modules 4 through 7 even do under the hood?" The last message was a single sentence. "Who owns this middleware?" That's when I stood up, stretched, and poured myself another cup of coffee. I wasn't smiling. Not exactly. But there was this hum in my chest, low, steady, electric, not gloating, just anticipation. The quiet kind you feel right before the roller coaster tips over the first drop. When you know gravity's about to take over and all you have to do is hold your breath and watch. Sometime around 3 p.m., after a full hour of digital wheel spinning and half the board teetering on the edge of mutiny, someone in their ad hoc legal committee finally got nervous enough to go spelunking through the old contracts. Not the polished versions in their shared drive, the real ones with coffee stains and midnight edit timestamps. The ones I wrote. They dug out the 2022 licensing and migration agreement. The one I'd handed Karen with a casual, "just needs your initials," were migrating the backbone. It had passed through approvals like warm butter, because back then they still trusted me to keep the neighborhood running while it was still moving. They flipped past the front matter, past the standard indemnity fluff, right past the security boilerplate. Then their eyes hit Section 3. I imagine the silence was deafening. 3.2 All derivative and deployment rights for modules 4 through 7, including violation enforcement logic, automated fine processing, amenity scheduling APIs, and vendor orchestration layers shall remain licensed exclusively to the originator, Jenna Wells Holdings LLC. No sublicensing, redistribution, or architectural replication permitted without prior written consent. I hadn't even been sneaky. I wrote it in plain English because I wasn't hiding. I was protecting. Those modules were my blood and bone. They were the reason the system scaled. The reason we survived the 2022 drought without missing a single fine payment. The reason Karen had a neighborhood to terrorize in the first place. But the woman never read it. None of them did. The first call came in at 3:11. I let it ring. Then another, same number, same desperation, slightly more shaking hands. I didn't answer. At 3:17, I sent a text. 5 words. Check section 3. That's all. I turned my phone over after that. Let them stew. Let them cross-reference every deployment trail, every dashboard that no longer loaded correctly. Let them realize that for 3 years their entire neighborhood had been operating on a structure they didn't own and could never recreate without tearing the whole damn thing apart. I imagine Karen tried to downplay it. "We'll just buy her out," she probably said in that syrupy voice. "It's fine. We'll negotiate." "Sure, Karen, except I don't answer to you anymore." And AltGuard already greenlit my new roadmap with clean rooms and fresh patents in flight. I don't need to sell. I'm not cornered. I'm crowned. It wasn't even about revenge at that point. Not really. It was about the long, slow bloom of vindication. The moment when the gaslight flickers out and the people who try to make you feel crazy finally see the truth carved in ink and initials and a paper trail they never thought mattered. I didn't have to scream. Didn't have to storm the gates. I just pressed send, finished my coffee, and added a sticky note to my whiteboard that said, "Remember to renew section 3 next April, because I'm not petty. I'm prepared." By 2:40 p.m., the cracks weren't just showing. They were spiderwebbing. One of the bigger homeowners, an elderly couple with a zero-tolerance policy for brown lawns, caught wind of the chaos. Probably from the landscape crew who couldn't keep their mouths shut during a quick sink. Or maybe from a neighborhood Facebook page where someone noticed I'd quietly updated my bio to Director of Product Architecture. AltGuard. No post. No brag. Just a silent headline with teeth. The couple called directly. Not the board. Not the treasurer. The wife herself dialed into the standing maintenance call and cut through the pleasantries. So she said, tone colder than a special assessment in January. "You don't control the irrigation system you demoed to us last month." The treasurer stammered something about temporary access issues. She didn't buy it. She was already gone. Within an hour, 2 automatic dues payments were pulled. Contracts worth thousands each. One cited IP conflict of interest. The other used the phrase integrity lapse. The third homeowner didn't cancel yet, but sent a formal letter demanding a full audit of chain of ownership, enforcement provenance, and license documentation. Their attorney CC'd outside counsel, which meant only one thing. Someone smelled blood and liability. From what Kara showed me later, the panic at Harmony Grove escalated faster than a sprinkler malfunction in July. Karen called an emergency board huddle with the treasurer, the landscape liaison, and their part-time attorney. The transcript was a mess of blame-flinging and blind reassurance. "We're resolving the issue. She doesn't have control over our systems. It's just a licensing misinterpretation." They were still clinging to the idea that if they said the word misunderstanding enough times, the $20,000 tied up in monthly automation would forget it was real money. But panic doesn't negotiate. Panic keeps score. And I stayed quiet. Didn't post. Didn't text anyone back. Didn't even refresh the neighborhood page. I just watched the chaos unfold like a time lapse of a perfectly trimmed hedge growing into a jungle. First the facade cracking, then the structure bowing inward, then the final snap before freefall. I knew their investors, aka the rest of the homeowners, would be calling soon. Their new attorney was going to run damage control, while the board tried to figure out how they just nuke their own community by deleting the only person who understood how anything actually worked. But what made it worse for them, what always makes it worse, is that I didn't gloat. I didn't leak anything. I didn't threaten. I didn't even breathe in their direction. And that silence? It scared them more than any lawsuit ever could, because it meant I wasn't coming back. By day 6, the teaser dropped. Just a single post from AltGuard official page. Quiet as a whisper, but sharp enough to slit a throat. Black background. White letters. Meet the new Director of Product Architecture underneath my name. Then the tagline Kara insisted on. Enforcement needs a spine. No hashtags. No fluff. Just precision. It hit like a brick through a stained glass window. By noon, the post had 14,000 views, 800 likes, and half the comments were from ex-neighbors pretending they always knew I'd do big things. Sure you did. Linda. That's why you ghosted me in the group chat the day I got canned. At the same time, back at Harmony Grove, Karen was busy trying to glue the building back together with passive-aggressive emails and caffeine. According to the grapevine, Kara's systems architect still played pickleball with one of their gatehouse guys. Karen called an investor alignment meeting that morning to calm the waters. Everything's under control, she said, according to someone who nearly spit their iced latte on mute. The licensing matter is a formality. Our team is pivoting aggressively. Meanwhile, their part-time attorney had sent an internal memo that leaked faster than a cheap garden hose in August. It was 2 paragraphs, dry as sand, but the core was nuclear. Pending resolution of the IP licensing dispute tied to modules 4 through 7. All automated enforcement, fine collection, and amenity scheduling is to be paused until further notice. No resident-facing materials are to reference future releases dependent on these modules. Failure to comply may result in exposure to litigation or contract voidance. Translation: strategy frozen. Pool bookings offline. Lawns turning brown. Investment deck worth less than wet toilet paper. When that memo hit inboxes, the treasurer finally moved. She scheduled an emergency board meeting for 8 a.m. The next day. Subject line: IP conflict and strategic exposure review. I imagine Karen tried to prep for it. Made a deck. Spun the story. Probably dragged the same half-baked rulebook I'd shot full of holes 6 months earlier into a new slide template with next steps slapped on top. But it was too late. They hadn't just lost the modules. They'd lost the narrative. And while all that unfolded, calls, panic, gaslighting in reverse. I was sitting barefoot in Kara's glass-walled office reviewing architecture drafts for our next rollout. Do we port the orchestration layer or start fresh? Her engineer asked. I looked up deadpan. Fresh. No baggage. No parasites. They laughed. I didn't. I was already thinking 5 moves ahead. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about building something cleaner. Something with a spine. Yes, but also one with memory. The kind of system that remembers who built it and never lets someone like Karen near the root keys again. My phone buzzed. Board meeting reminder from the old group. I still hadn't unsubscribed. I stared at it for a second, then turned it face down. Didn't snooze it. Didn't delete it. Just let it sit there blinking into the void. Unbothered. Because I didn't need to tune in. I already knew the ending. The room was ice. Not the sleek kind of cold you put on in presentations to look composed. This was more cold. Legal cold. The kind that seeps into your bones when you realize the numbers on the spreadsheet don't just look bad. They're fatal. Karen was already sweating through her pastel blouse. She'd come in hot. Voice tight. Blazer too crisp. Slides loaded. Jargon chambered. But 5 minutes in the board wasn't biting. They weren't even blinking. Just a row of silent eyes waiting for the truth to drop because they all smelled the rot. They just didn't know how deep it went. The module dependencies were misunderstood, Karen said, voice rising half an octave. We believe the code base was self-contained. Legacy language in the license wasn't flagged. Legacy language. That's what she called Section 3, like it was some footnote, like it hadn't been carrying their entire enforcement engine. The treasurer tapped the table once. Sharp. Surgical. Stop. Karen froze. Then came the attorney, older guy, white hair, pinch brow. The permanent look of someone who's cleaned up too many messes made by women with titles and no memory. He didn't posture. Just open the folder, flip to the page like he'd already memorized it, and read Section 3 aloud. All derivative and deployment rights for modules 4 through 7 remain licensed to the originator. J. Wells Holdings, LLC. No sublicensing, redistribution, or architectural replication permitted without prior written consent. He closed the folder. Didn't say another word. Didn't need to. Silence bled through the room like smoke. One of the newer board members leaned back in his chair, lips pursed like he'd just tasted something foul. The treasurer stared at the table. The landscape liaison turned a shade paler and finally looked like she remembered who wrote those modules. Spoiler, it wasn't Karen. The treasurer folded her hands. No theatrics, just a low, measured sentence that landed like a sledgehammer on a glass floor. So we build our entire neighborhood operations on something we don't own. No one answered. Because what do you say to that? Oops. We thought she wouldn't notice. We figured she'd never use it. They hadn't just gambled. They'd doubled down on a bluff and lost to someone who didn't even show up to the table. I wasn't there. Didn't call in. Didn't send a rep. I didn't need to. My name was already echoing through every word they tried to bury. And the rage in that room, it wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at Karen. Because somewhere along the way, that smug busybody had convinced them I was disposable, that my attitude was worth more than architecture, that a president title meant she understood how anything actually worked. They gave her power, and she spent it like a drunk with a black card. Now the charges were due, and all they had left was a neighborhood with no backbone, a rule book built on sand, and a clause in 12-point font that had more leverage than their entire board combined. The treasurer didn't even look at Karen when she stood up, just muttered, "We'll reconvene after executive session," and walked out. And Karen, she sat there silent, pale, finally understanding that the axe doesn't make noise when it falls. It just cuts. By the end of the second day, the number was $28,000. 5 major homeowners, all loud in their silence. The first 2 didn't even bother negotiating, just sent formal withdrawal notices citing license ambiguity and compromised operational stability. The third CC'd their entire executive suite and requested a forensic audit of enforcement provenance. The fourth attached a legal brief and a 7A breach clause. The fifth simply ghosted, cut off sandbox access, wiped the shared group chat, and scrubbed the HOA logo off their welcome packet like it had never existed. The local paper picked it up 12 hours later. Harmony Grove Estates in turmoil after licensing dispute freezes operations. Sources say key IP held outside HOA walls. Alt-Guard poaches former board architect. Fallout continues. No mention of my name directly, just references to a former systems designer. Disputed IP and strategic errors by new leadership. But the industry folks knew. People talk. Screenshots circulate. The neighborhood page gets noisy in all the right ways. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Not the headhunter offering double to jump again. Not the ex-neighbor trying to catch up soon. Not the board member who sent me an invite for a private coffee to reconnect and explore future collaboration. I just replied, "Thank you. I'm committed elsewhere." No shade. No snark. Just facts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was busy. Because while they were bleeding out in email threads and emergency Zooms, I was in my new office barefoot again, hair up, staring at a 72-inch whiteboard filled with boxes, arrows, and the cleanest architecture map I'd ever seen. No legacy garbage. No Frankenstack nonsense. Just clarity, ownership, control. This one was mine end to end. From violation engine to amenity scheduling, from permissions matrix to vendor orchestration logic. Mine. I didn't have to license it. Didn't have to explain it. Didn't have to build around anyone else's ego or negligence. It didn't feel like victory. Not exactly. It felt like oxygen. The kind you forget you've been missing until your lungs stop burning. Outside my window, the suburbs moved on. HOAs rose and fell. Karens chased the next power trip in sensible flats. Somewhere out there, Karen Hargrove was probably between opportunities, rewriting history on her LinkedIn and hoping no one asked the wrong questions. But I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was already writing the future in clean code and ironclad clauses. Clean. Strong. Bulletproof. They called it attitude. I called it leverage. And somewhere in Harmony Grove, the grass kept growing past 2.5 inches. The pool stayed closed, and the bird feeders stayed up. Because for once the neighborhood belonged to the people, not the woman who thought she could own it with a clipboard and a smile. The end.